This is the face of a god who has just made his final mistake. Gather round the fire, for this is not a tale of heroes. But tonight's tale is not of a common hunger. It is a warning of a famine born of darkness itself. A famine that the first Dark Lord, in his infinite arrogance, believed he could command. He called it a weapon. Before the first mountain was raised, before the first star was kindled, there was the music. And before the music, there was the void. An endless, silent, thinking darkness. When the music came, most of this primordial darkness was given form, purpose, a name, but not all. Some of it festered in the forgotten corners of creation, a sentient emptiness that knew only one desire: to devour, to unmake. The Valar, in their wisdom, walled off these shadows, content to let the forgotten remain forgotten. But one shadow, the greatest of them all, was not content. A void that had taken a shape, a hunger that had learned to wait. In the tongue of the elves, she was named Ungoliant, the Gloom Weaver. An echo of the primordial emptiness, whose famine was so absolute it could swallow the very concept of light. A famine that the first Dark Lord, in his infinite arrogance, believed he could command. They called it the Blessed Realm, Valinor, a name that dripped with sickening sweetness. I called it a gilded cage, a prison of light, blinding in its suffocating perfection. Every path was straight, every flower bloomed in perfect harmony, every note sung was a sickening echo of the great music I had once sought to master, to make my own. This was not life, it was stagnation, a perfect, unchanging diamond, beautiful and utterly, utterly dead. And at its heart, the source of this stagnant perfection, the two trees. Laurelin, the golden, Telperion, the silver. Their light bathed the land in an eternal, nauseating cycle of dawn and twilight, a constant reminder of the Valar's timid mastery over creation. They were a monument to everything I despised. A symphony of light I was born to shatter. They had chained me for 3 ages in the halls of Mandos. They had paraded me before them, forcing me to feign repentance. The fools. My power was diminished, my armies in the north broken. But my will had been tempered in the silence and the darkness. It was no longer merely absolute, it was patient. I needed a new weapon. My old methods of fire and steel, of legions of orcs and beasts of shadow were known to them. They were prepared for a war of sound and fury. They were not prepared for a war of silence, a war of nothing. And so his gaze turned to the southernmost edge of the world, to a land that even the Valar dared not tread. A narrow, desolate shore, crushed between the icy mountains and the sea. A place where the light of the trees had never reached, not even as a faint memory. This was Avathar, the Shadows. A land cloaked in a darkness so ancient and profound it had its own name, the Unlight. A darkness that was not merely the absence of light, but its eternal venomous enemy. And it was there, in the deepest ravine, that the Dark Lord sought his weapon. For when one wishes to unmake creation, one must seek the counsel of the uncreated. The journey to Avathar was unpleasant. The very air was heavy, thick with a silence that pressed against the ears. The Unlight clung to me like a shroud of wet silk, cold and suffocating. It was a power I respected, a darkness that was not of my own making, but something far, far older. It was primal, pure. And in the heart of that oppressive stillness, I found her. Her lair was not a simple web of silk, but a citadel of woven night, a fortress of shadows that drank the very hope from the soul. There, suspended in the center, was a hole in the world, a gravity well of pure despair that had taken the shape of a spider. She was magnificent, a perfect instrument of annihilation. Others saw a monster, a thing of cosmic horror. I, Melkor, the true master of all fates, saw the key to my magnum opus. But this was no mere beast to be tamed, no simple servant to be bent to his will. This was a tear in the fabric of existence, a void that wore a name. Morgoth, in his pride, saw a tool. He did not see the abyss staring back, ready to consume the master as readily as the meal. For when one makes a bargain with the void always, always sets the final price. I approached her not as a king demanding tribute, but as a conspirator offering a prize. Her countless eyes, pinpricks of ancient malice, fixed upon me. She was wary. Her hunger was eternal, but her fear of the Valar was older still. I did not offer her dominion. I offered her a feast beyond the scope of her primordial imagination. I spoke to her in the language of shadows, the tongue of the first darkness. I promised her the very source of all that sickly light she despised, the heart of her enemy's power. Serve me in this one glorious task, I whispered into her web of shadows, my voice a serpent's promise. And I shall give you a meal so grand it will echo in the emptiness for eternity. A banquet of light to sate a hunger that has gnawed since the dawn of time. I could feel her craving, a tremor that shook the very foundations of the ravine. But still, she hesitated. So, I sweetened the bargain. And after, I added, my voice dripping with false generosity, after the great feast is done, you may have whatever your hunger still desires. Anything that I hold in my own hand,
shall be yours." She agreed. The fool.
The pact was sealed, not in blood, but in shadow. She did not know that my promises were as empty as her own belly was about to be full. She believed she had made a bargain with a god. In truth, she had just become the fangs of a far greater one. The stage was set, the weapon was aimed. The symphony of light was about to hear its final crushing crescendo of silence. We moved as one, a cancer of shadow upon the holy land of Valinor. It was a sensation I had almost forgotten, the thrill of pure, unadulterated malice in motion. Ungoliant wove a cloak of unlight around us, a darkness so profound it felt alive. It had a physical weight, a tangible cold that clung to the skin and stole the breath from the lungs. It swallowed sound, it smothered thought. It was a perfect negation of their perfect world. Even the ever-watchful eyes of Manwë from his mountain peak, even the piercing gaze of Varda, who kindled the very stars, were utterly blind to our coming. We crossed the Pelori Mountains, a silent blasphemy upon their sacred peaks. We reached the golden gates of Valmar, unguarded, for who would dare assault paradise? The air grew thick with the cloying scent of the trees, a perfume of life and light that I would soon turn to the stench of death and decay. We came at a time of festival, a time of celebration, a time when all the Valar and the elves were gathered in praise of the music. Their joy was an insult, their songs a grating noise I was about to silence forever. And then we stood before them, the two trees of Valinor. They were more beautiful, more radiant than even I remembered. Lorelin, the golden, whose light was the warmth of a perfect dawn. Telperion, the silver, whose glow was the wisdom of 1,000 moons. The very heart of their world's lifeblood, pulsing with a serene, arrogant light. And I, Melkor, had returned to be its final, definitive night. The symphony of annihilation was about to begin. The trees were not mere plants. They were living light. They were time itself, marking the ages with their ebb and flow. To wound them was to wound the very fabric of the world, a crime so profound it had never been conceived. But Morgoth was not a creature of conception. He was a master of desecration, and he had brought an unholy thirst to the wellspring of life. I raised my black spear, a weapon forged in the cold furnaces of Angband, quenched in the venom of my own hatred. I strode to Telperion first, the silver tree. I drove the spear deep into its gleaming trunk. A cry of pure light echoed across the silent plains. The silver dew that fell from its leaves turned black and sizzled on the ground. Then I turned to Lorelin, the golden. Again I struck. a wound of absolute darkness. The golden light faltered, pulsing like a dying heart. The symphony had begun, and then I unleashed her.
It was a sight of such perfect horror that it brought tears of joy to my eyes. She scrambled towards the wounded trees, no longer a creature of shadow, but a maelstrom of claws and fangs and insatiable need. She burrowed her monstrous needle-like beak into their wounds, and she drank. She drank the light, she drank the sap, she drank the very memory of life from their core.
Till Perion's silver leaves withered in an instant, turning to black ash that drifted on a non-existent wind. Laurelyn's golden flowers collapsed, their light sputtering out like 1,000 dying suns. I watched as the light of creation was unmade. I watched as the source of their power, their joy, their very existence was drained into the gullet of my magnificent weapon. And I laughed. A laughter that shook the foundations of the mountains. A laughter of pure, final victory. And as he laughed, Ungoliant drank, and as she drank, she swelled. She grew to a monstrous form, a mountain of gluttonous night. The light she consumed did not illuminate her, but was instead converted into a black, suffocating vapor that poured from her form, the unlight. The land was plunged into a darkness so absolute that it paralyzed the will. Even the Valar, in their distant halls, were caught in a net of shadow, unable to see, unable to act. The Festival of Light had become a funeral for the world.
The silence that followed my laughter, it was heavy, unnatural. This was not the peaceful silence of the void I commanded. It was a dead silence, a choked silence. And the darkness she now wore was no longer a cloak. It was a shroud. It pulsed with a life of its own.
I had seen her grow before, but this was different. This was a transmutation. She was no longer a mere creature of shadow. She had consumed the very essence of power, and it had bloated her into something new, something wrong. The unlight that poured from her was so dense I could not see my own hand before my face. And through that palpable darkness, her countless eyes turned to me. They were no longer mere pinpricks of ancient malice. Now they burned, each one a stolen star, a captured galaxy, shining with a terrifying, intelligent light. The feast was over, but she was still hungry.
Time, in that absolute darkness, had ceased to exist. Seconds could have been centuries. We had to move. The hunt would begin soon. "You have feasted," I declared, my voice a command that once made mountains tremble. I tried to infuse it with the authority of a god, but even to my own ears, it sounded thin, swallowed by the oppressive silence. "The task is done. Now we flee. The spoils," I held them aloft, the 3 Silmarils, now the only light left in the entire world, are mine. They blazed in my hand, a holy fire of defiant light. They were magnificent. The light of the trees, my light, captured and perfected by the craft of Feanor, now returned to their rightful master. They were my triumph, the symbol of my new reign, my jewels.
But she did not bow. She did not cower. The hunger, now amplified to a cosmic scale, a gluttony fed by the very heart of creation, had burned away her ancient fear of the Valar, and with it, her fear of me. She unfolded her spidery legs, each one a tower of night, and her voice grated from the depths of her being. It was the sound of stone grinding on stone in the heart of a dying world. "You promised," she hissed, the words dripping with a venom that chilled my immortal spirit. "Whatever my hunger desires, and I desire those." And for the first time since the music began, Melkor, mightiest of the Ainur, Lord of Power, master of the fates of Arda, felt a tremor. It was not the familiar thrill of anger, not the satisfying burn of pride. It was a cold, gnawing sensation he had only ever inflicted, but never, ever felt. It was fear. He had forged a weapon to unmake the world, and that weapon had just declared him its final course. Never. The word was a shockwave. I poured all my remaining power into that single syllable, a roar of pure defiance. I, who had bent armies of fire and shadow to my will, would not be commanded by my own tool. I was the master here. I was the power.
And then she attacked. It was not a charge, it was an uncreation. Her webs of unlight were not mere threads, they were tendrils of the void itself, streams of absolute nothingness that shot out and wrapped around me. They did not burn, they did not crush in a physical sense, they smothered, they negated. The holy light of the Silmarils sizzled as the unlight touched it, the fire of creation battling the absolute zero of the void. My armor, forged of the coldest iron, groaned under a pressure that was not of this world. My very being, my immortal essence, felt erased.
And in that moment, you feel it, the crushing, suffocating weight of absolute nothingness. You who have unmade stars cannot draw a breath. You who have defied the heavens cannot move a muscle. The hunger you so arrogantly unleashed is now turning upon you, its creator, its master. And you realize, with a dawning soul-shattering horror, that the abyss has no masters. It only has meals. She was going to devour me. Me. She would drink my power, my essence, and leave nothing but a forgotten echo. The Silmarils burned my hand.
a desperate, agonizing pain as their light fought back. But her darkness drank even their holy fire. The irony was almost perfect. To be unmade by the very nothingness I had sought to wield.
In that final moment of pure, unadulterated terror, stripped of my pride, my power, my divinity, I did the unthinkable. I screamed. It was not a roar of command. It was not a bellow of wrath. It was the shriek of a mortal creature facing its own extinction. A cry of such profound despair and utter fear that it did what my power could not. It shattered the silence. It tore through the fabric of her unlight like a blade of pure sound, a spear of ultimate agony. It was the cry of a god remembering what it felt like to be small.
That scream was the last true sound in the north. It echoed through the dead plains of Valinor, across the grinding ice of the Helcaraxe, and into the deepest pits of Angband, his forsaken fortress. And from those pits they answered. With wings of shadow and whips of flame, the Balrogs, his most terrible servants, awoke. They heard the cry of their master, not as a command, but as a plea, and they came. They erupted from the earth like a legion of vengeful comets, their fire cutting through the unnatural dark.
Their whips of fire tore through Ungoliant's webs. The unlight hissed and recoiled from their searing flames. And for the first time, the great spider, the void itself, knew pain. And with pain came fear. She released her hold on Morgoth and fled, the Balrogs pursuing her, lashing at her with their fiery scourges until she vanished into the darkest corners of the world, a cursed and terrible memory.
They saved me. My creations saved me from my own. I collapsed onto the dead ground, clutching the Silmarils to my chest. Their light was a cold comfort, a burning reminder of my victory and my ultimate humiliation. I had my prize. I had plunged the world into my dominion of twilight. I had won.
But as my Balrogs stood guard around me, their fiery forms the only light left in the sky, I looked at the 3 jewels in my hand, and I understood. They were not just a symbol of my power. They were a reminder, a lesson seared into my very being for the rest of eternity. There are some hungers that even the Lord of all darkness should never, ever feed.
The tale has been told. Now, carry the embers. But this library has infinite shelves, and the echoes are endless.
If the clash of steel and the roar of beasts still calls to your blood, then seek out my chronicles of war and survival. But if it is the whispers of magic and the secrets of the cosmos you now seek, then follow the starlit path of Ilana's wisdom. Choose your path, but before you go, stoke the fire. Become a guardian of these echoes. The old tales are hungry for new listeners.